Welcome to the Sasquatch Report. Here, we explore fascinating encounters, legends, and stories about the mysterious and elusive Bigfoot. Before we dive into today's stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you've ever had your own Bigfoot encounter, let us know in the comments below. Now, let's get into today's stories. It was around 7:15 a.m., overcast, and the rain had just stopped when a lone hunter made his way along an ATV trail near Hugo, Oregon. He was about half a mile from where he'd parked, moving quickly through the dim morning light. The forest was quiet, damp, and heavy with the hush that follows rainfall. An unlit flashlight dangled in his hand. He wanted to remain as silent as possible to avoid spooking any deer in the area. His destination was a familiar clearing he'd hunted many times before. Then, something moved. Roughly 10 yards ahead, a massive figure stepped out across the trail, walking upright. It wasn't running, yet it crossed the 15 to 20-foot gap in just 2 long strides, gliding from left to right with unnerving silence. The hunter froze. The figure had made no sound, none that he could recall, just a sudden, smooth movement that sent a chill through him. Instinct took over. He clicked on the flashlight. What the beam illuminated stopped him cold. Just beyond the trail, about 20 yards down a slope, was a large, muscular creature covered in wet, dark fur, nearly black in color. It stood between 7 and 7.5 feet tall, easily weighing around 500 pounds. The hunter had seen bears before. This was no bear. The creature's movements were smooth and deliberate. Its legs remained slightly bent as it walked, torso hunched forward, its whole body gliding in a way that seemed almost unnatural. Long arms swung at its sides, and though he couldn't make out the hands clearly, the image burned into his memory. The head appeared to sit almost directly on its shoulders. It might have been somewhat pointed, but in the moment, details were a blur. The encounter lasted just seconds. The creature never turned back. The hunter never saw its face. He was too focused on the powerful, imposing figure disappearing into the trees. There was no threat in its movement, no aggression. But the fear was overwhelming. Heart pounding, the hunter turned and hurried back to his vehicle, every step shadowed by the weight of what he had just witnessed. He didn't tell anyone right away. Alone in the forest, the silence that followed seemed even deeper than before. Later, in a conversation with a Bigfoot investigator, he revealed he had carried a camera with him that morning, but the moment had passed too quickly, too unexpectedly. By the time he even thought of using it, the creature was gone. For years, he had dismissed the idea of Bigfoot. With all the cameras in the world, surely someone would have captured undeniable proof if it existed. Now, he understood why that hadn't happened. He had spent a lifetime in the woods and never seen anything like this. That morning changed everything. From that day forward, he would never look at the forest the same way again. It was early 2021, in a quiet, rural part of Humboldt County, California. A woman was awakened from a deep sleep. As she moved through the house to investigate, she noticed both her bedroom and bathroom windows had been left open, letting in the damp morning air. That's when she heard it, a faint sound off in the distance. Still half asleep, she assumed it was a motorcycle winding along the highway that curved through the nearby hills. But then the sound shifted. It grew louder, deeper, more resonant. What had started as a distant hum transformed into a long, low, vibrating howl, one that seemed to echo through the mountains, and then, just as suddenly, it stopped. She froze in place. That was no motorcycle. It wasn't a person either. It was a sound unlike anything she had ever heard, and she had lived in these mountains nearly her entire life. It had come from somewhere in the wooded ridges behind her home. Then came something even more unsettling. Silence. Absolute, unnatural silence. No dogs barking. Not even her own. No crickets. No rustling trees. Just stillness. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stood in the hallway, thinking, did I really just hear that? She returned to bed, and the clock glowed 3:33 a.m. in the darkness. Her husband, who had been snoring earlier, stirred as she gently nudged him. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. He hadn't. She described the sound, the strange, bone-deep howl, and then, almost in disbelief at her own words, said, "I think it was a Bigfoot." She could hardly believe she was saying it out loud. The thought seemed impossible, and yet, she knew what she had heard. Sleep wouldn't return for over an hour. They lay awake, listening, waiting to hear another sound, but the woods remained silent. The next morning, she shared the experience with the rest of the family. No one else had heard it. Still unsettled, she began searching online for animal sounds, mountain lions, wolves, fishers, foxes, but none of them came close. Then she typed in, "Bigfoot howls." And there it was. The 1994 Ohio moaning howl. The moment it played, chills ran down her spine. It was nearly identical to what she had heard. She played the audio for her family, and her oldest son immediately recognized it. He and a few friends had their own unsettling experiences in the area. Once, someone, or something, had even thrown a rock at him. He still kept that rock in his bedroom. Later, she called other relatives to share the story. Her mother mentioned something curious. A recent Facebook post from a woman just a few blocks away. The woman had been driving home late one night near the local dump, between Hoopa and Willow Creek, when she spotted something near the highway. The car behind her turned around and went back, apparently seeing it too. That spot was just a few mountain ridges away. Could it have traveled from there? She had spent most of her life in the area. She knew the sounds of the wilderness, deer, coyotes, bears, owls. But nothing like this. Never anything like this. And though the experience was deeply unsettling, she didn't feel fear. Not exactly. She felt lucky. She thought about that night in 2021 every day. Because whatever it was real. And she was certain she had witnessed something rare, and something very real, deep in the heart of Humboldt County. Sumas Mountain, near Deming, Washington, is a quiet, forested place, known for its rugged terrain and scenic views. On the second weekend of September 2018, a father and son set out for a routine evening drive on the mountain's miles of logging roads, something they had done many times before. However, this night would be different. At around 9 p.m., under a clear night sky, they pulled off onto a clear-cut section overlooking the valley. The air was still, the only sounds coming from distant crickets and the rustling of leaves in the light breeze. With nothing but darkness ahead, they took out their flashlights, scanning the tree line in the distance. That's when they saw them. 3 distinct pairs of glowing eyes, reflecting back at them from the woods, approximately 150 to 200 yards away. At first, they thought they were looking at a mother bear and her cubs, but something felt off. The eyes were too high, too spaced apart. They kept their lights trained on the figures, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. Then, without warning, the largest figure let out a deep guttural grunt, followed by a chilling howl that sent a shiver down their spines. Before they could react, it charged. It moved at an astonishing speed, tearing up the steep hillside with ease, staying just along the tree line. The sheer power of its movements was unreal. It covered what had to be 50 yards in mere seconds. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The father and son sat frozen, hearts pounding, as they shined their flashlights toward the spot where it had halted in the tree line. The figure stood there, waiting. And behind it, the 2 smaller figures remained, unmoving, watching. Then, the silence came. A deep, unnatural silence. No crickets. No wind. Just stillness. For the next 3 hours, the 2 smaller figures lingered at the tree line. They moved cautiously, shifting positions, but each time the father or son made a noise, they froze. It was as if they were observing, waiting. The eyeshine flickered, an orange-yellow glow that never wavered. One of the smaller ones behaved strangely. It would pop its head up from behind stumps and logs, watching. Disappearing, then appearing again. Almost playful. But this wasn't a game. The minutes dragged by, turning into hours. Neither man spoke much. The air felt thick with tension. Every muscle in their bodies screamed at them to leave, but their curiosity held them in place. Then, just before midnight, the silence broke. The largest figure emerged from the tree line, stepping fully into view. The father and son raised their flashlights, illuminating the creature. It was massive. Its dark brown form towered over the forest floor, standing with a presence that felt almost unnatural. Then, in full view, it did something that made their stomachs drop. It stepped over a log and began walking downhill. Not like a bear. Not like any animal they had ever seen. It moved on two legs. The smaller figures followed, mimicking its movements. As they descended, the son, fueled by a mix of adrenaline and fear, shouted toward them. The largest one stopped. It turned. Even from the distance, they could see the slight bob of its head, the distinct movement of its arms swinging at its sides, just like a human. Then, it was gone. By the time they left, their hands were still shaking. They knew what they had seen. The next day, the son returned. The ground where the creatures had been standing was torn up and disturbed. But it had been too dry, no footprints remained. He walked to the log where the largest figure had so effortlessly stepped over. At 6'1", he tried to do the same. He couldn't. He had to climb over it. A week earlier, his parents had been in the same area, picking berries. That day, they had heard a single, clear whoop from the woods. And then, just like that night, silence. What really happened on Sumas Mountain that night? No one can say for certain. But one thing is undeniable. They had witnessed something they would never forget. The wilderness off Mountain Loop Highway was the perfect retreat for a quiet weekend under the stars. In August 2012, nestled in the dense forest near Darrington, Washington, a couple arrived in the afternoon, ready to enjoy nature's solitude. They chose a secluded spot near a dirt road, surrounded by towering trees and the distant murmur of a nearby river. As they set up camp, something odd caught their attention, a set of unusually large footprints embedded in the dirt. The prints were wider and longer than any human tracks they had seen before, as if left by someone walking barefoot with massive feet. The couple exchanged puzzled glances but shrugged it off. Maybe a hiker had passed through earlier. The evening air cooled as the sun dipped below the trees, casting long shadows across the campsite. Around 5 p.m., the silence was suddenly broken by an unnerving sound from the hills north of them. A long, high-pitched wail that ended in a deep, guttural growl. The sound reverberated through the trees, making the couple freeze. It wasn't a coyote. It wasn't a bear. Still, they convinced themselves it was just an unfamiliar animal and continued with their evening. But as nightfall crept in, so did an eerie feeling. Every so often, they would hear faint rustling on the hillside, like something moving through the underbrush. At first, it was distant. But as the hours passed, the noises grew closer. By 9:30 p.m., the unease had settled deep in their bones. The couple, now on edge, decided to retreat into the safety of their SUV. They locked the doors and turned off their lantern, hoping the dark would conceal them. Minutes passed. Then, just outside their vehicle, heavy footfalls crunched against the forest floor. The steps were slow and deliberate, circling their camp. The couple held their breath, straining to see through the blackness beyond the windows. Then, a sudden splash. The river, just 30 feet from their car, had been disturbed by something large, something powerful. They flicked on their flashlights, shining them toward the water, but the beam revealed only the rippling surface. Whatever had made the sound was out of sight. The minutes dragged on, stretching into an hour. Then, another sound, one they weren't expecting. A pair of headlights appeared in the distance, followed by the crunch of tires on gravel. Another vehicle was approaching. A pickup truck pulled up just beyond their campsite. Two men stepped out, their faces pale and tense. One of them called out, "Did you guys see that?" Confused, the couple shook their heads. The men walked closer, their voices low but urgent. We were driving down the road when something huge ran across right in front of us. The couple's stomachs tightened. The driver took a deep breath. It was covered in hair. Massive. Walked on two legs like a man. We almost hit it. He glanced at their campsite, eyes flicking toward the tree line. You might want to get out of here. The other man nodded. People have seen stuff like this out here before. The weight of their words settled over the couple. They had spent the past several hours listening to something move in the woods, watching, lurking, waiting. And now, they had confirmation. They weren't imagining things. Wasting no time, the couple packed up their belongings as quickly as they could, never once turning their backs to the trees. Within minutes, they were speeding down the darkened road, leaving the campsite behind. But the unease stayed with them. They would never forget the sounds, the footprints, or the way the night itself seemed to breathe with an unseen presence. And though they left the mountain loop highway behind, one thought haunted them long after. What if it had been watching them the entire time? For nearly 2 decades, hiking the dreary Cheney Trail in Humboldt Redwoods State Park had been a cherished tradition. A father, his 2-year-old son and his parents walked the path 3 to 4 times a week, their footsteps weaving a familiar rhythm through the towering redwoods. Nothing about the forest had ever felt unsettling. Until now. Over the last few weeks, something had changed. It was subtle at first. A sense of unease that neither the father nor his parents could quite explain. They brushed it off as nothing more than an overactive imagination. This was their trail. They knew it better than anyone. But as they hiked that day, the feeling became impossible to ignore. It was mid-afternoon, and the family moved at their usual pace, talking and laughing. The 2-year-old set the rhythm, stopping every so often to examine a leaf or point at a bird overhead. The forest was peaceful. Sunlight filtered through the towering redwoods, casting shifting shadows along the well-worn trail. Then it happened. A piercing, guttural scream echoed through the trees, so loud it seemed to shake the very air around them. The family froze. It wasn't an animal. Not a coyote, not a fox, not a mountain lion. It sounded almost human, yet impossibly deep and powerful, carrying through the dense forest as if whatever it was that made the sound wanted them to hear it. The son exchanged a glance with his parents. None of them spoke. The sheer power and volume of the sound had set their instincts on high alert. It felt calculated. Not a random noise, but a warning. Only the father, slightly ahead and hard of hearing, had missed it. "What was that?" he asked, seeing the stunned expressions on their faces. His wife turned to him, voice hushed but urgent. "You didn't hear it?" Before he could respond, she added, "It was loud. Too loud. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't normal." A shadow passed over the father's face. He hesitated for a moment, then said, "I know exactly what you're talking about. I've heard it before." The father sighed. "I didn't say anything before because I wasn't sure what it was. I didn't want to scare you." That same eerie feeling settled over the group once more. He explained that on his last hike he had felt watched the entire time. He had heard something moving in the brush, keeping pace with them, just out of sight. And he had heard the scream before, not as loud as today, but unmistakable. They didn't waste time debating the possibilities. Something was out there. And it was close. Their hike was no longer casual. They picked up their pace, moving quickly back toward the trailhead. But no matter how fast they walked, the eerie sensation of unseen eyes followed them. By the time they reached their car, they could still feel it. Something was out there. Something had seen them. Only when they drove away did the tension finally begin to fade. That night, they sat together, replaying the moment over and over in their minds. There was no rational explanation for what they had heard. They had spent their entire lives in these woods. They knew every call, every cry, every whisper of the forest. But this was something different. They had always heard Bigfoot stories growing up in the Pacific Northwest. But those were just that. Stories. Until now. October 20th, 2024, began like any other crisp fall evening on the Rocky Boys Reservation in Hill County, Montana. But for one man, his brother, their partners, and what they would soon encounter on Sandy Creek Road, everything was about to change. He had never believed in Bigfoot. The online videos always seemed fake, or at best, he thought the creature might be some kind of spiritual being, an interpretation held by some within his Native American community. But what he saw that night defied all expectations. It wasn't a myth. It was real. They were driving along the quiet, winding road when it happened. From behind a tree, a massive figure stepped out into view. The creature stood an estimated 8 to 9 feet tall. Its towering frame was coated in sleek black hair that appeared oddly clean, almost groomed. This wasn't the matted, foul-smelling beast often described in old tales. It had broad shoulders, a barrel chest, and visible muscle definition rippling beneath the fur. Its long, powerful arms swayed naturally at its sides. But what struck him most was its sheer size. This wasn't just an animal. It looked like a man, only larger, stronger. Something beyond human. A combat veteran who had served in Afghanistan in 2004, he was no stranger to danger. He'd spent years hunting, hiking, and surviving off the land. Fear wasn't something he felt easily. But in that moment, standing face to face with something so massive and unknown, he felt utterly powerless. They had no weapons. If it had chosen to attack, there would have been nothing they could do. The creature didn't move aggressively. For a few seconds, it just watched them, its eyes reflecting the light from the truck in an eerie glow. Then, it casually lifted something to its mouth, perhaps food, glanced at them one final time, and turned to walk away, slow and unbothered. Suddenly, from the truck, his brother's wife began screaming. She and his girlfriend had stayed behind while the men approached the creature. Now, panic erupted. The two men sprinted back and jumped into the vehicle as his brother continued filming, hands shaking. As they tried to comprehend what had just occurred, something else emerged from the darkness. A second figure, this one smaller and brown, was crawling low to the ground, inching toward the truck. His brother's wife spotted it first and cried out in alarm. He turned just in time to see it approaching, its movements strange and deliberate. Adrenaline surged. He shouted for her to drive. She slammed her foot on the gas, and as the truck sped forward, he fumbled to roll up the window, pressing against his girlfriend in fear that the thing might reach him. They drove until they were off the mountain road, far enough to breathe again. The shock lingered, their minds racing to make sense of what they'd just seen. Had it really happened? Had they truly come face to face with not one, but possibly two creatures? The answer was on video. His brother had recorded the encounter, hard evidence of what had taken place that night. Since then, the memory has replayed endlessly in his mind. His girlfriend speaks of it often, still in disbelief. But he doesn't question it anymore. He knows what he saw. And he's certain of one thing. Bigfoot is real. And now, they have the proof. If you enjoyed these Bigfoot stories, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. And make sure to add a comment if you've ever had your own Sasquatch encounter. Thank you.